You may be seated, please. I'd like us, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. And as he shared those thoughts about growth, it occurred to me to do something very quickly. How many of us are entrepreneurs in the room? You own a business, you're proud. Entrepreneurs in the room. A round of applause for all the entrepreneurs in the room, please. And it's Workers' Day as well. How many of us do not own businesses? We work at a company, an organization.
My name is Dr. Ojoma Ago. I work with Hija HMO as a medical advisor. My experience at the fair last year was amazing. It was an eye-opener for me. It made me feel like, yes, God has brought me to the right place. My expectations were that I wanted to get a better job and a well-paid job. Eventually, they were all met. Although I didn't get the job at the spot, as I had some interview with the ESCO members and even the CEO before I got the job finally. Attributes or qualities that can make an individual stand out in a crowd would be how they speak, what their CV looks like. Do they have the basic computer knowledge? Do you have proficiency in the use of the Microsoft Office tools like Excel, PowerPoint, or Word, etc.? Thank you, Covenant Capital. Thank you, Covenant Christian Center. And I hope every job seeker out there will be attending the Lagos Career Fair 2019.
The Lagos Career Fair 2019. Date, Saturday, 18th May 2019. Venue, the Covenant Place Ikowu, next to the National Arts Theatre. Time, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Interested candidates must register at www.insightsforliving.org/Lagos Career Fair. Admission is free to all registered participants. Lagos Career Fair 2019. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to the platform studio. It's been 4 speakers already. We just finished listening to Sarah Lacey and Dr. Anil Gupta, and I think the education has just been massive. It's like we just finished an MBA class right now with Dr. Anil Gupta. But I'll go back to the panelists, and then we'll just talk on. First, let's go to the third speaker of the day, Sarah Lacey. It was an interesting conversation where she sort of painted a Silicon Valley picture, and we're wondering, okay, where is she going with this? And she ended with look within, and we're like, wow. Tola, what do you have to say to that?
I mean, so again, like you mentioned, her speech was, so packed with information. And one of the things, the way she started, mentioning that what brings growth could also be the things that bring obstacles. Powerful. That was really powerful in terms that we have to look. And what I saw from it was, even as a nation, the things that bring growth for us, like Mr. Sheguadeni mentioned, the things that brought growth on oil, and things that also are obstacles. And then going from that, and when she was speaking about fear, the missing fear factor being, the primary ingredient for a lot of Elon Musk. And I was thinking, Elon Musk, I mean, I follow him on all platforms. When he speaks about, one day he was driving through traffic in LA and was tired of the traffic, and then just decided that he was going to make a tunnel under LA. And he has done that. He's done 1.8 kilometers of that, and it's been tested already. And so just that, that entrepreneurial and that can-do spirit. From one person, imagine if we imbibe that as a nation, and if corporations also imbibe that. And then when she finished off with capital, the statistics on venture capitalism in Africa is really, it's terrible, for so many reasons. And you look at companies that actually raise capital across, in the West. And then sometimes you think we have better ideas here, but then that sort of mental block that a lot of venture capitalists have towards Africa. And primarily of us looking inwards. As a nation, and even I think as a continent, we're so hardwired to look outside as opposed to inside solutions. There's so much dormant capital in this nation. A lot of proceeds from oil and a lot of businesses from entrepreneurs can actually help us with our entrepreneurs raising capital for technology, for agriculture, for health, for everything that we need. So on the side of the entrepreneurs, looking more inwards and not looking outwards. And secondly, on the part of the capitalists, the people who have dormant capital in Nigeria, also either sitting in Nigeria or sitting outside Nigeria, to also look in this quest to develop Nigeria. Their capital is led by the entrepreneurs who have ideas, world-changing ideas. So her amazing in terms of motivating both entrepreneurs, government, institutions to mobilize the nation forward.
Absolutely. And what I really liked was that money that they have can be used within. Be creative about your money. Don't lock it up in a bank somewhere under your bed.
Or treasury bills.
Or treasury bills. Exactly. There's so much to develop here. And it comes back to you, which is the genius of venture capitalists. It comes back to you eventually. Let's go to our PhD presentation by Dr. Gupta. Obinia, you were just going on, like you have like 10 pages of strategy right now.
When you get a free MBA refresher course, I mean, you just take it. But seriously speaking, Dr. Gupta was just awesome. And I think that his point about growth and its imperative is so critical to us as people and as a nation today. Because where you are and where we are is where there's population growth by default. But really, we have to find ways for us to grow as a people. And he's given us like almost like a framework and a reference point for how we need to do it and the things we need to check for what is sustainable growth. And that's really key. And if we talk about the things that he's got about the advantages that you have and why you should do it and the things you need to leverage from scale, network, location, we've got people. The same people that could be a problem. Those is actually an asset depending on what we do with them in the short term. But I think for me, what I will just hold on to is two things. One, everyone needs to grow. But you must have a logical framework by which you do it.
Amazing. Before we go back to the main auditorium, Soji, your thoughts?
I head Covenant Capital, and we do both lending and even, business. We have a business school for the local church community. And what we hear a lot of, entrepreneurs come in, it's a no-brainer or things like that. You can see how Sarah Lacy, pushed her argument with data. So basically showing the facts, that this is actually, it's not a perception thing, this is actually what the data says, And on the business side, you hear people, saying they don't need a business plan and things like that. But with Professor Gupta, you can see that, look, there's a strategy to grow. There's a way to go about this.
Exactly. After all is said and done, we all need to grow. And one of the first ways to do that is by education. And that is the message of the platform today. We need to go back to the main auditorium to keep educating ourselves with the next two speakers. We'll see you right after that.
You're welcome once again to the platform Nigeria. We are live at the Covenant Place, Igomu. Our next speaker is Dr. Biodun Adedipe. Dr. Adedipe is the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe Associates Limited, a firm of management and financial consultants. He holds a BSc in economics first class and a PhD in economics specializing in corporate finance. He has over 38 years of postgraduate work experience covering university teaching and research, private consulting, economic research, investment, merchant banking, financial and management consulting. Notably, he has served on a couple of presidential advisory committees. He has also served and still serves in various capacities at numerous professional bodies and associations. He is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Bankers and the Economic Summit Group. Please join me as we welcome to the platform for the first time, Dr. B. Adedipe.
Start this afternoon by acknowledging Pastor Pojo Imade for having me here. I count it a very high honor indeed. And also to draw the line that I am the first speaker today who's coming here for the first time. And incidentally also, I can draw a thread all through the speeches made before mine, and then I want to build a perspective of looking at things differently than what many analysts of our economy actually do. And as my icebreaker this afternoon, I brought up this cup. There's water in it. Now the water deliberately is at a level you can say is the midpoint. And this can trigger a huge debate and controversy. When you ask people, what do you see? Someone says, I see a cup that is half empty. Another person says, no, I disagree with you. That cup is half filled. Which means we are looking at the same thing, but giving different interpretations. And that is the nature of economics as a discipline. And I'm going to talk this afternoon about the Nigerian economy and my perspective. Similar to that also is if we put it to test here, this audience, and we ask people to close their eyes and point north, you'll be amazed at how many directions people will point at. Everyone will point in different directions. And that is why, because when it comes to economics, we are all participants. And so therefore, we have different ways of interpreting what is happening. But to the professional economists, they will look at your choices, they look at your decisions, and then they ask whether these align with principles. Principles, by nature, are universal, and they are also timeless. And that is the thread I can draw between all the speakers, starting from Pastor Poju Oyemade. He made a mention that the platform started in May 2007. And when he said that, what came to my mind is that was the time we're having conversation about how to grow the Nigerian economy to $963 billion by year 2020, so that we can become ranked at the 20th largest economy in the world. And then, Ndidi came up and painted a picture that at the beginning nearly killed me on my seat. Because I was almost like, is it this bad? And then came up Segun and he talked about the cow. And in that particular parody, he ended by saying the cow was killed. But that made people see what they never saw before. So I asked myself, should we kill the oil sector in Nigeria? I said, no, we won't kill it. Rather, we engage what comes out of that sector to do what needs to be done. And then, of course, I listened to Sarah, and I saw a need for enterprise, for people to be really up and going in terms of creativity, innovation, looking around them and seeing what other people don't see. And that really is the essence of my presentation. Seeing what others don't see, and therefore talking about what they don't talk about. And of course, the last presentation, excellent take on business strategy, which again is applicable to nations and individuals, families, communities, as Dr. Anil Gupta said. So my message, that would be my first slide. And the message simply is this, that Nigeria is a good country, with an exclamation sign. Nigeria is full of opportunities, some of which are very rare to find in the combination we have them in this nation. But whether you see those opportunities or not will depend on what you give attention to. And then I will follow that by saying, what you see when you look will determine the direction you go. Now, if I make reference to what the MC said earlier on about people emigrating, I will tell myself their own reaction, not response, is to what they saw and interpreted as this is not an environment conducive for us to remain. So they chose to react by looking out. But there is a big difference between acknowledging problems and responding to those problems appropriately. And we see it this way, that appropriate response is to have a strong will and then a high level of commitment, and what I will call disciplined execution. That runs through the entire stakeholders of this conversation we're having today. But equally, the direction you are going is also vital, and that is what I'm going to talk about today. Now, speed is useful only if you are running in the right direction. I'm quoting someone here called Joel Baker. So, question, should we continue to blame the government? It's a question. But what data shows us, and from practical knowledge of how economics run around the world, governments don't grow or do business. Where they have made such attempts all around the world, the outcomes have not been in any way desirable. But what governments do is to facilitate business. But when we look at the numbers, I looked at this year's budget as proposed by the executive, 8.826 trillion naira. Of course, only yesterday the Senate moved that up by 86 billion naira. Now, if you take that figure and look at my estimate of what state governments and local governments in Nigeria spent last year, then increase that by a percentage that takes account of their IGR in terms of the history in the last 10 years of growth, and also what we expect if they possibly add some loans to that as well. What are we likely to get at the end of the day as government spend in 2019? I compare that with our GDP nominal for 2018 at 127.76 trillion naira, which converts to about $364 billion. Now, all of that taken together, federal government, state governments, local governments, will produce only 10.47% of the entire value of our GDP, which means government is not a big number when it comes to spending and creating value in the Nigerian economy. It also means then that the present and future Nigerian economy lies with the private sector, not with the government. Okay? And if you therefore look also at the economic recovery and growth plan, there are 5 planks to that. There's a plan that talks about macroeconomic stability. There's a plan that talks about agriculture and food security. The third plan talks about infrastructure renewal. The fourth one talks about energy and petroleum products. And then the fifth one talks about industrialization, with special emphasis on SMEs. Question, how will that growth be funded? Now that plan also says that it is expected that government will be able to generate 20% of what is required to implement that plan, which means 80% funding for that growth plan for Nigeria will come from the private sector. So question, where then are the opportunities? Now let me also remark on this, because this is very, very important. And that is the fact that if you, as a Nigerian, all you say is repeat what someone else has said, then your voice can never be distinguished in the market. Now, the key issue here, I call it a problem with us, which gets compounded for 3 reasons. Number 1 is what we say about ourselves and what we do to ourselves. Because what you say about yourself is what people hear about you. And so the next line talks about the media, and that is what the media reports about us and cause other people to say about us or to do to us. We commonly put it as the media sets the agenda for discourse, which means what they put before us is what they talk about. The third one now is what other people say about us and what they do to us. There's a whole lot, therefore, around that premise of acrimony, half-truths, and half-baked analysis over the Nigerian economy. and of course, economic governance as well. We have paid too much attention to dealing with symptoms rather than the underlying structural defects, distortions, and rigidities. Now, let me talk about what looks good about our economy, because people hardly talk about this. And I always wonder, is there really nothing good about this economy? But looking at the data, and I've been privileged to be a part of this conversation for so many years. And anytime I look back, I say, okay, 1987, the discussion was about the tariff structure in Nigeria. 1988, it was the steel subsector. 1990, it was industrialization policy. We came down to 1993. We ran through SAP, of course, from the mid-80s. All along, of course, different plans, different ideas, dimensioning of problems. But in reality, if you look at the Nigerian economy today, what looks good about it? And it's important for those who are thinking of emigration. Now, macroeconomic indices, and I'm sure someone will say, aha, here it comes, economist. They are mostly pulling in the right direction as of today. The economy is growing, no doubt, but it is not growing fast enough. So that gives us an idea of what to deal with. So the conversation, therefore, is not about the economy not growing. The economy is growing, but it is not growing fast enough. And all you need to compare with that growth rate is to take the Nigerian population. As at the 29th of April, 2 days ago, our population was slightly over 200 million, using United Nations estimates. And now, you look at that number, 51.9% of that number today resides in urban areas. Now, when half of your population is in urban areas, as we learned in our days in the university in the 70s, high school in the 70s in the university, when we learned in sociology, one of the major problems of a society is when you begin to advance, more people will leave the rural areas to the urban areas, and then social problems will begin. One major thing that causes the problem is what we call urban anonymity, which means because I don't know the next man to me on the street. It doesn't care how I behave because it can't take my matter to go report at home, which is something that is natural in the rural areas. And so, but with that also there's a change in lifestyle. Because what that means is that the more people come to the urban areas, the more they get exposed to modern life gadgets. Those gadgets in turn also demand for power. So the demand for power also will grow with that. But we missed out that completely. Here also we have a country where the population is growing at the rate of 2.6% annually. But not only that, you also look around at what is the fertility rate. On the average woman in Nigeria, by the statistics available today, produces 5.4 children. That's the average. And now, where the real challenge lies, that's the fertility rate for Nigeria, by the way. Where the real challenge lies is when you now disaggregate that population age-wise. You now find that the median age is 17.9 years. And that means slightly over 50% of our population is below 18 years of age. So what does that imply for us in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Now everybody talks about 2050, we'll be the third largest in terms of population globally. We've been talking about it for quite a while. But then, are we responding to it? Now, if you look at the trends with our economy, if it is possible to bring up my slides, I would like us to project slide number 7, because data and, of course, charts are very powerful means of communication. What the trends suggest is that there is some improvement. The top left slide there shows the direction of our gross domestic product, which measures the value of goods and services we produce annually in Nigeria. How is that growing? You can see the pattern when it went into recession. and then when recovery also started. Because some people query as to, are we really sure the economy has recovered? And my retort is very simple. We were willing to rely on the data churned out by National Bureau of Statistics Nigeria to believe that the economy went into recession. So why then the difficulty? Accepting the same organ telling us that the economy has recovered. Then, the top right chart is what I also use to underscore the fact that our economy is diversified. Because there you see the various sectors of the economy and activities taking place in Nigeria. And that tells you that, in actual fact, the bulk of our foreign earnings, that is where the problem lies. The economy itself is diversified, but our foreign earnings are not. In which case, the focus then, in terms of problem, is how do we diversify our foreign earnings? Then, of course, the left chart down is what we call the mystery index. It's a combination of 4 indices. It contains our inflation rate, contains interest rate, unemployment rate, and of course, it also takes account of the GDP growth rate. So what it does simply is to say, look, if you are growing your economy fast enough, that rate should be greater than inflation rate combined with both lending rate and also unemployment rate. But for us in Nigeria, those 3 weigh more than the GDP growth rate. And that is why it has been climbing for quite a number of years. But there is also a green light here. And that green light is, for those of us who are professional economists, we don't look at data as at today, we look at trend. Now, if you look at the trend with that chart, it has gotten to a point of inflection. That's where it turned. It has turned downward. That means there is a clear impending improvement. So let's take the next slide. Now, and with this, I'll be done with data. We then talk to issues. Okay? Now, the top left chart shows you Nigeria's external reserves. That means we produce here, we sell to the rest of the world. We call it buy from the rest of the world. But how do they compare? What has been the outcome? Have we been saving money, or we have been spending money in the context of what the economists will call Dutch disease? Now, let me explain the Dutch disease, because I will come to that shortly. Dutch disease simply means you make the bulk of your revenue. This time around, we are placing it in context of foreign earnings. The bulk of it is from hydrocarbons, that is crude oil, condensate, and associated gas. You get between, in the recent statistics, it is between 92 and 93% hydrocarbons, which means non-oil earnings, foreign, is less than 10%, okay? So now what this also means is that we need to change that particular narrative. So how will that happen? So therefore we have to learn from the Dutch. By the way, crude oil, as the chemistry says, is formed in the ground over millions of years. So for every barrel you remove from the ground, it will take millions of years for it to be replaced naturally. Okay? So that means we call it a wasting asset. So if it is a wasting asset, what then are you doing with the proceeds of the sale of it? That's the connection to what Segun said earlier on, which I will bring together. So, but what has happened to us is that the summary of the recession Nigeria went into in 2016 is that the economy was taken into recession by crude oil, because we didn't earn enough to sustain our growth and lifestyle. But when that market picked up again, our economy climbed out of recession, which means if we don't change the structure, that defect, anytime there's a problem with the international oil market, the happenings there can take us back into recession. All right? Now, there's a lot of conversation about borrowing. But what the data also tells me is that where we are today as a nation is not a worry to any economist that is not going to be sentimental about the analysis. If you are dispassionate about it, the issue to an economist is not whether you are borrowing or not. The issue is, what are you borrowing for? And this runs through individuals to families, communities, and the entire nation. Now, if as a family you borrow to buy food, you are in trouble. Okay? But if as a nation you borrow to fund recurrent spending, you're also in trouble. And so the issue should be, what are we borrowing for? If we borrow to build infrastructure, relevant ones, not white elephants, relevant infrastructure that enables and empowers people to work, to generate and create value, then that is a worthwhile investment. It is then seen as an investment. Now, I made reference to the Dutch earlier on. I will come back to that when I talk about the way forward. Because oftentimes we dimension our problems, but we don't talk specifically about what we should be doing at this time. Now, the exchange value of the Naira has been stable in the last 34 months. That is not something that you come across easily in most nations around the world. The other thing I want to mention is this. Before I go to the third part, there are 4 parts to my presentation. Okay? The other thing I want to say is this. Foreigners seem to see more of the opportunities in Nigeria than we do. And they seem also to have more confidence in us than we have in ourselves. And I can't think of a better example to illustrate than what happened some 2 weeks ago. For the first time in decades, not just in years, the federal government of Nigeria went out, issued 30-year bond. That means if you invest in that instrument today, you will get your money back in 30 years' time. They sought to raise 20 billion naira to test the market. It was oversubscribed 4 times. Over 400% subscription. Which means those who put their money in there have a confidence in the future of Nigeria. So now, coming to the other side, what does not look so good? We have been growing our economy, but we're not creating jobs. That means we are growing it non-inclusively. And if you check the data, especially, let's cut it back from year 2000 till date. But let me also say this, there is data on everything in Nigeria. It's a matter of where you go. That's what will determine whether you find it or not. Okay? And I also must mention this, that people say Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. And I stand there as a Nigerian and as someone who deals with data and does research, that none of those who make such claims have been able to prove it. Because I challenge them. Now, when you talk about poverty, you also will talk about how you measure it. If you say you conducted a survey, then I want to know where you went to. How you drew your sample from the population. What was your response rate? What are the usual measures of confidence in statistical analysis? And I haven't seen any of such. But unfortunately, they give us that, and we also begin to amplify it. Now, take for example, someone is on 30,000 naira monthly, the new minimum wage. But transporting himself from home to work and back home costs about 750 naira a day. He eats at work, he provides food for his family, he pays rent, he does many other things. When you add all of this up, by far greater than that 30,000 naira. So, but if you look at his income, we say this man must be poor. But when you look at his spending, the picture completely changes. And what I've observed is this. The key issue is that there's a whole lot going on in Nigeria in the informal sector, which these foreign analysts ignore. I've already talked about high rural-urban migration, creating social pressures. There's also rising, rate of emigration. We call it the new brain drain. But what I always advise them is this. If you look closely around you, in fact, each time, for example, many of us here reside in Lagos. Every time you hit the road, heavy traffic, then you complain about the traffic. But if you sat back to imagine what could be the cause, it is very simple. Too many of us come on the road same time. That's the meaning of the traffic jam you are experiencing. But if you now think a little bit about it, then we say, look, if you look at this number, these people need certain things. They need food, they need clothing, they need accommodation, and many other things to sustain life. So instead of seeing them and complaining, I see them rather as markets. That means if I can find something I can sell to 100,000 of them per day, and the estimate for Lagos is about 24 million today, okay? If I can sell something, 100,000 units in one day, and I make a margin of, let's say, even just 2 naira, that's 200,000 naira margin per day. And a whole lot of that is happening on our roads. Every month, the estimate of the sale of plantain chips in Lagos only is slightly above 2 billion naira. But we can discuss that a lot more. We are highly import dependent. That is why I chose to dress this way today. The fabric may not be made in Nigeria, but the person that put it together is a Nigerian. That's value created here. The shoes I'm wearing, made in Nigeria. Maybe the only thing you take out is my wristwatch. But even my cufflinks were designed here in Nigeria. Because it carries my initials. That's Nigerian content. So for everything you buy that is made here, you are creating jobs in Nigeria. But for every imported thing you buy, you are creating jobs abroad. That is something that concerns all of us. Why are things this way? Number one, we don't have a policy anchor. That's my personal take of it. We have not had a policy anchor as a nation. And what I did there was to say, okay, let me look at a few countries we can talk about. Indonesia, 261 million people population. But Indonesia was like Nigeria some time ago in the past. It was oil dependent. But over the course of time, they changed the narrative. And it became from oil, they moved on to agriculture, and then from agriculture to manufacturing. And of course, if you look at their GDP today, services dominate. And of course, what key lesson do we take here? Oil is not the problem. It is what we do with the process of sale of oil that is the problem. Malaysia. Each time we talk about things in Nigeria, we always make reference to Malaysia. We did that some 12 years ago when we began the conversation about year 2020. But what is it about Malaysia? It's not as big, population very small. Of course, in terms of the economy, the shape, financial system, very strong, a reference globally. How about China? China is my model any day. Because I've been a part of that conversation since 2008, when we came up with an idea, Infrastructure Nigeria. Let's model what China did to turn China into the largest manufacturing land in the world. What did they do? Infrastructure focus. Let's build roads and railways. Let's also build dry ports, that is inland container terminals. Situate them all over the country in such a way that anywhere you put your factory in China, you can get materials in, you can get your final product out without stress. And then the added power. And so today, China is #1 in manufacturing in the world. Everybody is buying from them. And of course, that is part of the issue between China and US today. South Africa. I found something interesting about South Africa when I researched for this purpose. South Africa, yes, population-wise, much smaller than Nigeria, maybe just a little over a quarter of our population. But the issue is this. With nominal GDP that is less than that of Nigeria. South Africa certainly is number 2 in Africa in terms of size of the economy. But what one important thing can we take from them? That is the fact that they have a widespread social network that therefore made the informal sector to be very thin, 15%. While the informal sector in Nigeria is 54%. Later data available. So, but in South Africa, it's just 15%. And so, what do we take from that? It means the social network, at times we call it social intervention as a policy of the government, is very key in terms of growing the economy. The day someone doesn't need to worry about food, that is when he can begin to think. If you look at Dubai, everything in Dubai is wired around tourism. Everything about that, you can call it a nation state because it's just one of 7 members of United Arab Emirates. But everything is wired around tourism. So now, if we go to the next slide, and this is my final part of the presentation. What are the obstacles and what is the way forward? The first, as I said just now, is absence of a policy anchor. That means a particular thing we single out as a people, which then will not matter who is in government and who is not, that we take as a direction to go for decades. My recommendation here is manufacturing, and it is very simple. People also talk about manufacture based on what is available locally, and I disagree with that. Because each time I look at Japan, I ask myself, how many raw material do they have right there in Japan? How many can we point to in terms of what they produce and sell to the rest of the world? So it is not about what you have, it's about what you can produce, because the dispensation we are in is ideas rule the world. And I will talk about that shortly in education. Our over-dependence on hydrocarbons needs to change. There was something we made as a recommendation to the government of Nigeria in 2011. And what we said then was that, and that also, Shegun mentioned it in passing, the only way you can get out of this problem is to be strong-willed about matching your fiscal plan in the sense of there are 4 elements to Nigeria's fiscal operations. There is oil revenue, there's non-oil revenue. There is recurrent expenditure, and there's capital expenditure. What we need to do is, over a defined period of time, we recommended them 5 years, that we make non-oil revenue equal to recurrent expenditure, so that we can free the earnings from oil for capital expenditure. That is infrastructure saving for the future. Then I've mentioned this also here, that raising tax rates, from the research we have done in taxation, is not the cure-all for growing tax revenue. It is like flogging a dead horse when you raise the tax rate and have only those who are in the tax net to bear that burden. Rather, we should creatively and innovatively think of how to bring those outside the net into the net. But that was by way of incentives. It's also a principle in economics that says people respond to incentives. Our tax system does not provide for redress. If I have any complaint about my tax, there's no window for me to present such complaint. And even if I complain, I get slammed. More money to pay. However, dependence on imports can also change. Happily, the current government signed an executive bill, I think about 2 years ago, because I made a recommendation about that time in this kind of conversation, that every year we budget in trillions. Why can't the government have a policy that says a certain percentage of that budget will be committed to things made in Nigeria? And what I recommended then was to start from 30%. Happily, that was the executive order that the VP signed in as the acting president. But there is something we need to add to that, and that is have it as a 10-year plan, where we raise that gradually every year to 80% in year 10. In which case, ultimately, the bulk of what government spends in Nigeria will be on things made in Nigeria. And then, of course, critical infrastructure. I'm totally in agreement with the direction the government is going. Rehabilitation of the roads, renewal of the railways, and new construction. The aviation sector needs overhauling. And then the power sector needs to be completely re-engineered. But perhaps one thing we can add there is that, yes, it's the right direction to privatize. But I've also seen from study of privatization all over the world for decades now that oftentimes when we privatize, we only convert public monopolies into private monopolies. And so they deliver no value. That is what has been happening in Nigeria. And how do we overcome that? Maybe in our privatization, we now begin to include a clause for adequate capital. If our discos don't have the muscle to do what they are supposed to do, and I recommended this 4 years ago when the president was about to be inaugurated, I said there is a simple way to get things to work. Mandate the discos to meter all the consumers. Once they do that, revenue will drop. They are entrepreneurs. They want to make money. Then they will realize that to make money, power needs to be generated. That will now make them not think about only themselves, but the entire value chain. If we go that route, we can sort out power not long from now. Then, of course, this is perhaps, yes, I'm about getting to the end of this. I have just 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The lack of relevant 21st century educational and health systems. The key thing I will emphasize here is that our school curriculum needs to change. And that will align the products of our school system with what the market needs. The one major element we have found missing is critical thinking. We need to include in school curricula critical thinking. But that is what we have found as the difference between our system here in Nigeria and what happens out there. And I don't agree with those who say our educational system has collapsed. My basis for that is very simple. That system produces our children. They go out for graduate studies all over the world, and they easily excel. So where did they find that capacity